Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. My name is Geeta Katari. I'm going to lead you through the signing ceremony today. Before I go any further, let me inform you that interpretation is available by putting on your headphones under the table for signing delegates and in the seat pocket for others. Channel 1 is for English et la chaîne numéro 2 pour le français, and channel 0 will give you the language being spoken. In a moment, the Secretary General on my left will open the signing ceremony. At the end of his remarks, the Secretary General will invite the signing delegates to proceed to the signature. At that moment, you may open the folder in front of you where you will find your signature sheet, letter of intent, or statement of support. We kindly ask you to wait until one of the photographers is in front of you before signing. We have pens on the table which are ready to be used, no need to click them on, and you can use your own pen if you prefer. For those of you signing the convention, please sign just once on the dotted line in the center of the sheet and add today's date, 19th of September 2024. For those of you signing a letter of intent or a statement of support, we've provided a customized document as previously agreed with your delegation. For everyone else in the room, we would be grateful if you could remain seated during the signing and not stand up to take photographs. All of the photographs will be made available later on the dedicated STTR MLI webpage. After the signing and the photographs, the Secretariat team will be collecting each folder from you. The signature sheets will then be bound together with the text of the convention. The letters of intent and the statements of support will be registered. Following the signing, Manal Corwin, Director of the Center for Tax Policy and Administration, will invite a series of speakers to share short remarks. Ms. Corwin and the Secretary General will then share some closing remarks to mark the end of the ceremony. Thank you for your attention. I now hand over to the Secretary General.
Thank you very much, Geeta, and dear ministers, ambassadors, colleagues, friends, all. A very warm welcome to this signing ceremony for the Multilateral Convention to facilitate implementation of the Pillar 2 subject to tax rule. Thank you to all those jurisdictions that are showing their support for the subject to tax rule today, including the 43 jurisdictions signing the multilateral instrument, a letter of intent or statement of support. It is another very concrete step towards ensuring fairer and better international tax arrangements, in particular for developing countries, by further strengthening global minimum taxation with the implementation of the new Pillar 2 subject to tax rule. The multilateral instrument allows developing countries to request the automatic inclusion of the subject to tax rule in bilateral tax treaties with developed country inclusive framework members, to help ensure a minimum level of taxation on relevant cross-border payments and to prevent circumstances where income is either taxed at very low rates or not taxed at all due to differences in tax regimes between countries. Today's ceremony is also a major milestone for the two-pillar solution. A growing number of jurisdictions, now approximately 60, have already implemented or are in the process of implementing the global corporate minimum tax under Pillar 2 through their domestic legal legislative processes. This is helping to stabilize the global tax landscape, to reduce the incentive for multinationals to profit shift, curb harmful tax competition, remove inappropriate pressure on countries to offer low or no corporate tax arrangements in return for investment, and helping to generate important additional revenues for governments around the world. The subject to tax rule will further help ensure that the global tax system is fairer and works better for developing countries in a globalized, digitalized world economy. Currently, the ability of developing countries to tax certain intra-group payments, such as royalties and interest expenses, is limited by tax treaties with developed countries. The subject to tax rule allows developing countries to levy top-up taxes for these payments when they're taxed at a rate below 9%. Ultimately, this rule will open up a new source of revenue to help developing countries tackle the significant pressures on public finances that they're currently facing. Investment needs are massive, with the annual Sustainable Development Goals financing gap projected to reach $3.9 trillion US next year, up from $2.5 trillion US back in 2020. In parallel, the higher interest rate environment has increased developing countries' debt servicing burden. In 2023, a record 54 developing countries allocated 10% or more of government revenues to interest payments. So domestic resource mobilization will be key to helping address these fiscal pressures. Currently, developing countries lose substantial revenues to base erosion and profit shifting by multinational enterprises and are more vulnerable to these practices than developed jurisdictions. This contributes to developing countries having, on average, lower tax to GDP ratios than OECD countries. For example, African countries have an average tax to GDP ratio of 15.6% compared to 34% among OECD countries. The subject to tax rule was driven and shaped by developing countries to ensure that the two-pillar solution is responsive to their needs for domestic resource mobilization, and was supported by all members of the inclusive framework, all 140 plus members of the inclusive framework as it was finalized. During the negotiation process, contributions from developing countries played a critical role, notably in securing the application of the rule to payment for services. The OECD remains committed to providing the necessary technical support and the necessary capacity building to developing country members of the inclusive framework to help them implement this subject to tax rule. This includes providing detailed background documentation on the rule and the multilateral instrument, offering tailored country-specific advice on implementation, and helping developing countries ensure they have all the information they need to request the application of the subject to tax rule in their bilateral tax treaties. We have already provided bilateral support to more than 30 jurisdictions, as well as online training that has been attended by more than 500 tax officials and viewed more than 1,000 times separately. In the coming year, we will host additional information sessions and briefings for tax officials at regional and national events. We look forward to continuing to support governments in signing, ratifying and implementing the rule, and as always, to make our international tax arrangements fairer and work better in an increasingly globalized and digitalized world economy. So with that, we now move to the most important part of today's proceedings, indeed, the signature. And I hand the floor back to the MC.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. So now it's the moment to open your folders and get ready to sign, but don't sign yet. Sign when you have a photographer in front of you. The photographers will be moving around the room, going one by one. So please sign when you see a photographer ready to take your picture. Thank you. Congratulations to everybody. We have Germany, who will be signing in a moment. We also have Portugal and Costa Rica, who weren't able to be with us today in Paris. They've signed letters of intent to sign the convention. Maybe we can give ourselves a round of applause for this moment. And I should say we also have Indonesia online there. I now invite Ms. Manal Corwin, Director of the Center for Tax Policy and Administration, to introduce the next speakers.
Thank you very much, Geeta, and greetings to your excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a great pleasure to see so many of you here today on what is a significant day. You join us from around the globe, representing countries of many different regions and levels of development. Before diving into the next part of the ceremony, I'd like to mention that the Minister of Finance of Romania was supposed to be with us today, but has unfortunately been retained as a result of severe flooding in Romania, and we are all deeply saddened about the terrible impact of these floods. Your Excellency, Mrs. Iona Bivularu, thank you for being here today in his place. We hope that you and your loved ones are keeping safe, so thank you. So it is my honor to now introduce the next series of speakers. We will have the pleasure of hearing from 5 heads of delegation seated around the table, and one special signatory joining us from the other side of the world, and we're very appreciative of that. So without further ado, I would like to invite His Excellency Mr. Ryan Strawn, Minister of Finance of Barbados, to take the floor. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It is great to be here this afternoon to participate in this very important juncture. Let me indicate that Barbados has been a committed partner in this process, and we've had long engagements with not just the Secretariat, but certainly with members in the room in being able to usher in these reforms. It has been a journey, and it must be clearly understood that small states like Barbados and countries like ourselves that are vulnerable, that we have to be a part of the process as we usher in these new rules and regulations globally. But members, we thank members for their understanding that the impact on small states is much larger, much more acute than it is for larger states as we make these changes in a significant way. We have introduced the reforms legislation as well as changing systems and rules in relation to establishing a global minimum tax. We've been able also to be able to have the qualified minimum top-up tax, which we believe is particularly important in order to comply with the international standards. And this, along with a number of other critical reforms that we've undertaken under our IMF program, we believe have signaled a new level of confidence, both for business as well as investor confidence in relation to doing business in Barbados. And therefore we see this as a particularly important part as to how we are able to continue to not just drive investment, but certainly to continue to build social capital, strong social capital in a world that is becoming much more dynamic. And therefore, as we seek to build not just climate resilience, but economic resilience, we see these reforms as a critical part of that exercise. As some of you may be aware, we have been strong advocates, Barbados has been a strong advocate on not just the reform of the international financial architecture, but certainly as it relates to building climate resilience and what is required to achieve that, especially for small states like ourselves. And under the Bridgetown Initiative, we continue to work with partners to be able to assure that not just the advocacy is there, but we get the actions taken early enough in order for it to make a substantive difference, not just the lives of Barbadians, but we believe the lives of all global citizens, because these issues will continue to confront us if we don't have a cohesive plan of action that allows us to address the issues that affect the most vulnerable amongst us. So the Bridgetown Initiative, the third iteration of it, the Prime Minister will be launching at the UN General Assembly next week, and therefore we invite fora like these to be able to help give feedback as we seek to move the needle forward, particularly paying attention to the fact that small states have a level of vulnerability that must be understood on multiple fronts. And therefore, signing this, participating in this signing ceremony is a signal that we will do what we must do to ensure that we are compliant with the international standards and that we will continue to be a strong partner and advocate in relation to bringing order to the international space. And so therefore, we want to thank the Secretariat for the commitment, the committed work that they've given to us over these last months. It has been a journey, and thank members of the Inclusive Forum for their feedback and understanding in relation to what is required from us. So thank you very much, and it's good to be here this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I would now like to invite our next speaker, His Excellency, Mr. Romuald Wadani, Minister of State for the Economy and Finance of Benin, to take the floor. Votre Excellence, la parole est à vous.
I'll give you the floor, sir.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Général,
Secretary General, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen.
je suis vraiment très honoré de représenter le Bénin.
It is a great honor for me to represent Benin here today, this afternoon, for the signature of this multilateral convention. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank and congratulate the team and the co-chairs of the inclusive framework for the great efficiency and pragmatism with which they have conducted this entire process that brings us all here today signing this convention.
Comme le Bénin,
For a country like Benin,
dans une phase de
which is a country
économique de transformation,
which is in a phase of economic transformation, the mobilization of domestic resources is really key to everything we're trying to do. If you do not have the capacity to mobilize tax revenue, you are unable to act. We don't have natural resources to export. Our resources are generated from taxation. We have no oil, we have no timber. So it is through our efforts that we manage to mobilize those resources. Working like the OECD is doing with the G20 to really globalize in taxation is something that is of enormous benefit to us. If you look at a country like Benin, which is transforming itself, you're looking at a country which essentially has no industrial base, which has great deficits in infrastructure, and so calls on international actors to do the necessary work to build that infrastructure. If the resources we generate are falling into the hands of international and multinational companies, if we don't have the structure to ensure that the taxation revenue comes to the country, essentially we end up falling further and further into debt.
il y a une insuffisance des ressources domestiques.
Because we have insufficient domestic resources otherwise. And so if we fall into a debt cycle, we generate more and more difficulties, and a poverty cycle really becomes deeply rooted. So this work is extremely important, alongside everything else that the OECD is doing. As the Secretary General said earlier, there is a great deal of support provided to countries like ours. There's accompaniment, there's knowledge transfer, there's training, all sorts of things that provide an appropriate framework for us to work to make sure that these resources stay within the country. So we thank the OECD for this. I'd also like to take this opportunity to say that a country like ours, which depends greatly on these domestic resources to resolve its infrastructure deficits, to ensure that our young people have access to good education, really, at the end of the day, to prepare our population to move towards greater prosperity and greater well-being. As our natural resources are not sufficient, we really need to mobilize everything else at our disposal. And the difficulty that we face today, which is quite linked to the mobilization of domestic resources, because we have few of these resources. If a significant part of the tax revenue is used to pay for your debt, to reduce that debt, then your population is suffering. Your young people are not benefiting from that support that you hope to give them. So a country like Benin, which has proven its resilience, which has not defaulted on its debts for the past 35 years, is a country which is seeking not to be penalized for mobilizing its taxation resources. Each time we collect reports, our taxation revenue, a significant part of that is taken to pay our creditors, and therefore is not available for building schools, is not preparing our country for the future, is not helping us to benefit from modern technologies. And so we need to look at the whole structure of international loans and financial support for these countries, in addition to seeking to mobilize our taxation resources. There are many things that our country is trying to do. Some 9 years now, we have been working hard to maintain a deficit at low levels. It was at very low levels before COVID hit us. We have never defaulted in the past 35 years. Benin was one of the only countries facing the COVID crisis that said we're not asking for our debt to be cancelled. We will pay our dues. But, of course, I have paid the price for that. We are paying some of our tax revenue in servicing that debt, and therefore not spending it on schools, not spending it on infrastructure, not spending on the well-being of our population. Taxation is good and well. Retaining that tax revenue is a wonderful thing, but if part of that revenue is being diverted to servicing the debt, then we're losing out. So this is a call from the heart. We must look at debt servicing in line with this initiative. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Votre Excellence.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
To introduce our next speaker, Her Excellency, Ms. Ludmila Petkova.
Thank you, Manal. Dear Secretary General, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to express my sincere appreciation for this opportunity to gather with you today and to mark this important achievement of the members of the Inclusive Framework on BEPS. This first subject to tax rule multilateral instrument signing ceremony is a great step forward in our continued progress to address BEPS concerns and to protect the tax base of jurisdictions that need it most. Today's success builds on years of hard work at all levels of government. I'd like to acknowledge in particular the tremendous efforts of the delegates of Working Party 1 on tax treaties and related questions in fulfilling their mandate for the inclusive framework to develop this instrument. I'd like to point out that the STTR MLI in this operation and design owes a great debt to another important multilateral instrument that came before it, the BEPS multilateral instrument. Bulgaria also had the honor of participating in the first signature ceremony for that instrument back in 2017 and has since ratified it. Now, as all you know, the BEPS MLA, which was so innovative and new at the time of signature, has now become an essential component of our global tax treaty landscape. 7 years later, we welcome another multilateral instrument that promises to make its mark, and we welcome all jurisdictions implementing the CTR to consider joining it. Bulgaria has been committed to ensuring the success of two-pillar solution in close cooperation with all the other members of the inclusive framework, as shown by our presence at this important event here today. Similarly, Bulgaria has been committed to aligning itself with best policies and practices in the field of international taxation, both in the context of tax treaties and beyond. We look forward to continuing to work with other members of the inclusive framework towards a better and more robust international tax system. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now have the honor of inviting His Excellency Monsieur Doudou Fouamba Likunde Lubutai, Minister of Finance of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, to take the floor. But first, let me note that today is a doubly important day for you, as you have signed not one but two multilateral instruments, the BEPS MLI earlier and now the Pillar 2 STTR MLI. So we are absolutely delighted to welcome you as a signatory of both instruments. Votre Excellence, la parole est à vous.
Monsieur le Secrétaire Général,
Secretary General,
Leurs Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs,
Excellencies, heads of delegation, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, we would like to congratulate you on all of the work that has been done here.
une longue traversée.
It has been a long road,
Aujourd'hui,
and it has reached its destination today as a result of the dedicated work of all of the members of the OECD. We are very grateful for this effort, and we reiterate our commitment to the member states to work with you all in the context of the synergy that will be generated in pursuit of our common goals.
d'entre vous,
Like many, or as many of you know, the Democratic Republic of the Congo
exportateurs
is the leading the country that has the leading resources of cobalt in the world. Most of the multinational companies present in our country benefit from these resources and implement extremely aggressive taxation practices connected with their activities, which are
pays démobilisés autant de ressources.
practices which deprive the country of many of the taxation and financial resources that we need to ensure development. We are very aware of the considerable challenges facing us, not the least of which is the challenge of climate change. We need to implement adaptation and attenuation practices. To do this, countries need to be able to mobilize additional resources. And we would like to inform the world that our country is determined to mobilize its domestic resources to this end. In signing this multilateral instrument today, we are convinced that this will help us to tackle taxation difficulties, including the undercapitalization of our companies, but also BEPS phenomena in the country, which are depleting our tax base and handicapping us in mobilizing the resources that we need to implement the policies that will transform our nation. We reassert our commitment to cooperate with member countries pursuing this path, reaching an international taxation system that can help countries to implement their rights, to combat tax fraud and tax evasion in the interests of the well-being of our populations.
De la première
As we said when we signed the multilateral instrument earlier today, if we all play our part, the world will benefit. And so this is an opportunity before us. We must seize it. All of the members of the OECD working with us, we thank you for your effort and, once again, our commitment to continuing this work together. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Votre Excellence. Our next guest is joining us all the way from Jakarta. I'm delighted to invite Her Excellency Mrs. Sri Mulyani Indrawati, Minister of Finance of Indonesia, to share a few remarks with our sincerest thanks for joining us at such a late hour. The floor is yours, Your Excellency.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Matthias Cormann, the Secretary General of the OECD, and fellow excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to join you all today from Jakarta, very late afternoon, to sign the STTR MLI on behalf of Indonesia. By signing this STTR MLI, Indonesia is proud as an early adopter of this important instrument. As we all know, as part of the two-pillar solution, the STTR was agreed on a consensus basis by the inclusive framework. And as part of the consensus, members of the inclusive frameworks on BEPS that apply tax rate below 9% to the income covered by the rule have committed to implement the STTR in tax agreement with developing country, such as Indonesia, when asked to do so. This is truly an important agreement, reflect the fact that the STTR has been a key priority for many developing countries, as we heard from our previous speaker, of the inclusive framework on BEPS. It was developed to cater to their need, in particular by restoring certain source taxing right on the key type of cross-border intra-group payment, including interest, royalties, and payment for services. As also the other four previous speakers, domestic resource mobilization is indeed a very critical for all developing countries, and the STTR, by providing another avenue for developing countries to protect their corporate tax base, as well as aligning with this objective to expand their domestic resource mobilization. Over the last year, the inclusive framework has carried out an extensive process to assist the implementation of the STTR. Thanks to this process, we now over that 1,000 tax treaties, that is roughly a quarter of the global treaty network, is covered by this commitment. The STTR MLI will enable the swift and coordinated implementation of the STTR across relevant treaties, as well all began the work to deliver on the STTR commitment. Indonesia is delighted to be part of this first concrete step. I wish to warmly congratulate to all fellow signatories today, and also to encourage all other members of the inclusive framework that are implementing the STTR to complete the step required for signature of the STTR MLI and its subsequent ratification. Thank you so much, and I wish you all a very good afternoon.
Many, many thanks, Your Excellency. Last but not least, I'm pleased to invite Dr. Kulaya Temit, Director General of the Ministry of Finance of Thailand, to share a few remarks.
Thank you very much, dear Secretary General and Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to take part in this historic ceremony alongside all of you today. Today, Thailand has taken concrete steps toward the implementation of Pillar 2 and the subject to tax rule by confirming its intention to sign as soon as possible the STTR MLI. I can assure you that my teams are working tirelessly towards this aim. Although there are yet some steps for us to complete this landmark, this occasion invites us to pause and take stock of how far we, members of the inclusive framework on BEPS or IF, have come and how much has been achieved to date. Indeed, the international tax landscape has changed dramatically over recent years, largely thanks to efforts within the inclusive framework to combat base erosion and profit-shifting practices in their varied and evolving forms. Since its inception, The IF has provided a dedicated forum for jurisdictions around the globe of all levels of development to work together to strengthen their tax policies and to tackle the most pressing and challenging issues in international taxation on a consensus basis. The STTR MLI is a clear example of the ability of the IF to deliver concrete results, and in particular results that cater to the needs of developing countries, both in substance and in form. As we all know, the substance of the STTR MLI, the STTR itself helps protect developing IF members' right to tax certain intra-group payments. But let's not forget that the form of the STTR MLI is also key. It enables low-resource jurisdictions to swiftly update their 3D networks without the need to undergo costly and time-consuming bilateral renegotiations. Thailand looks forward to joining the ranks of signatories to the STTR MLI. We are eager to continue to work together with other members of the IF in building a stronger international tax system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Temit, and thank you again to all of the speakers for your valuable interventions today. It is a real honor to hear from you, and we are truly delighted to be welcoming you and everyone here today as we mark such a significant occasion. Now, if you'll indulge me, I'll also share just a few remarks of my own. It is a great pleasure to see so many of you here on what is a significant day for all of us. The subject to tax rule is part of the inclusive framework on BEPS's work on the tax challenges arising from the digitalization of the economy. It is part of Pillar 2, which seeks to raise the floor on taxation of cross-border activity of multinational enterprises. And the contours of the STTR were first made public in the Pillar 2 blueprint published in 2020. At that point, the work to finalize the rule began in earnest. During the discussions on the design of the rule, countries and jurisdictions were committed and collaborative, prepared to compromise when necessary, and in the end, in July of 2023, the inclusive framework was able to finalize the rule. Importantly, the 140 plus inclusive framework members also agreed to the STTR commitment, which is really the core of what we are celebrating, which means that inclusive framework member jurisdictions, as you've heard, that apply adjusted nominal rates below 9% to items of covered income have committed to implement this rule in their tax treaties with developing countries when requested to do so. This is significant, and it shows that the IF can deliver for developing countries. But that was not all. The inclusive framework also agreed that there would be a process to assist developing countries with the implementation of the rule, and that process has also been ongoing and working towards this moment and beyond. It was also agreed that there would be a multilateral instrument to assist with the swift and efficient implementation of the rule as a pathway to realizing the commitment. The instrument is the subject of today's ceremony, and it was negotiated indeed in record time. The first discussion of the text was at the end of May of 2023, and the text was adopted by the inclusive framework in September. The speed with which the STTR MLI was agreed is a great testament to all of the work, hard work of those you around the table as well as your teams. But that remarkable timeline also underlies the challenges of agreeing a multilateral international tax convention. It is not easy work, and that cannot be underestimated, but it is the work that the inclusive framework is committed to doing. We've done it twice now in terms of multilateral instruments, once with the BEPS MLI and now the STTR MLI. And it was certainly worth the effort as we today mark the first steps towards implementation of the rule and the commitment. It's very impressive that so many jurisdictions have been able to become early adopters through today's signing or through signing a letter of intent, and we're looking forward to seeing that list of signatory jurisdictions grow, as well as seeing implementation of the rule through bilateral negotiation continue. As always, my team and I stand ready to help with that process, and we very much look forward to continuing to work with you all. So thank you very much. And I would now like to invite the Secretary General of the OECD to make his closing remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Manal, and thank you so much to all of you. The strong level of support that we've seen for the subject to tax rule shows how the two-pillar solution can deliver for developing countries and ensure that everyone benefits from the consensus-based solutions that are being developed to make our global tax system fairer and work better. This is just the latest of several important strides we've made on a two-pillar solution this year. On Pillar 1, we are nearing the adoption of the Multilateral Convention to implement Amount I, with only a few issues remaining on Amount B. On Pillar 2, more than 60 jurisdictions have now taken steps towards implementation, as I've mentioned in my opening remarks, of the global minimum tax, or in the process of progressing its implementation. I mean, this is a seismic shift in the taxation of multinational enterprises to reduce profit shifting and stabilize the global tax landscape, and in our estimates, raising additional revenues of about $155 to $192 billion US per year. And together we will continue to build on these achievements. We will, from our point of view, support developing countries with domestic resource mobilization through capacity building. We have established pilot programs aimed at helping developing countries implement the global minimum tax, with 9 countries participating so far. And if you're not yet participating, please approach us, and Manal's team is ready to help. The programs help these countries design the domestic minimum top-up tax and analyze the impact of the global anti-base erosion model rules on their tax revenues and tax incentive frameworks. And of course, we will also continue to work with our friends and colleagues at the UNDP, Tax Inspectors Without Borders program, which has raised $2.3 billion US in additional tax revenues for developing countries so far. This initiative is expanding to provide hands-on assistance to countries in implementing the global minimum tax, and with information exchanges to help administer it. We'll continue to focus on tackling tax evasion and avoidance through the exchange of information. The OECD is at the forefront of international efforts to enhance transparency and put an end to bank secrecy, and our Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information for Tax Purposes supports stronger tax authority cooperation and the automatic exchange of financial account information to detect tax evasion. Key future topics for the forum include enhancing the exchange of tax information on crypto assets and real estate. We're also supporting efforts to digitalize the tax administration in developing countries. New digital tools can help enhance tax collection in developing countries, increasing revenues, making more efficient use of tax authority resources, and enabling the completion of more tax compliance risk assessments. The OECD is supporting the adoption of these tools through the OECD Forum on Tax Administration, which provides a platform to share the OECD's best practices and developing countries' own experiences and knowledge on digital tax administration. And we look forward to work with you across each of these priorities, building on the progress we have made here today to lay the groundwork for better tax cooperation and better tax policies for better lives. And let me just say in closing that I've also heard the comments that were made by our friend and colleague from Benin, that have been made by others before in relation to issues like the issues associated with export credit arrangements, and we'll certainly be exploring on how we might be able to tackle some of these issues moving forward. But I've very much heard the issues that you have raised. And so as a final, most important point of business, so we have a photo now, because you've already had your photos taken individually, but we've got to make sure we take our photo collectively. And there's a spot where our friends from Protocol will guide us towards, to make sure that there is historic evidence of this historic moment. And then after that, there's an even more important point of business, and that is this evening's reception to commemorate the proceedings today. So thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon, and looking forward to having a chat during the reception. Thank you.